This is going to be my review for Marie Antoinette from 2006. Not sure exactly what got me in the mood to watch this. I think I had seen that Sofia Coppola was coming out with a new movie, The Beguiled, and I've always had this on my list of movies to watch. I think I actually started it one time and didn't get very far in it, never finished it. And so I just decided to rent it the other day and check it out. I'm a really big fan of Kirsten Dunst, and she's the main actress here. So this is story-wise and plot-wise pretty basic, but so just some of like the background people. This was written and directed by Sofia Coppola, daughter of Francis Ford Coppola, if you don't know. And this was her third movie, and so I'd seen the two movies she's done before this, Virgin Suicides, which also starred Kirsten Dunst, was 99, and then saw Lost in Translation a long time ago. That's from 2003. And actually, I think I read that she wrote Lost in Translation in the middle of working on this movie, Marie Antoinette. She was kind of in a bit of a bind or a writer's block while she was writing this movie, and so she ended up writing Lost in Translation in the middle of it. And so this is, haven't seen any of her movies after this, but like I mentioned a couple times, main actress here is Kirsten Dunst. She's playing the lead, the titular character, Marie Antoinette. If you don't know, this is a real historical figure. She was the Queen of France, one of the last queens before the French Revolution. So basically, just this is her story. Starts out right away. She's originally from Austria, and she's set to marry the Prince or Dauphin of France, and starts at the beginning there of her leaving her home country to go to France and get married. And so in the movie, Jason Schwartzman, a really good actor, he plays Louis the 16th, and he's going to be Marie Antoinette's husband. And so he's just the prince at the beginning of the movie. His father, Louis the 15th, is played by Rip Torn, which I thought was a pretty interesting or maybe even odd casting choice. I always think of Rip Torn from Men in Black, or a little bit later in Dodgeball as Patches O'Houlihan. So he's playing the King of France, Louis the 15th. That's kind of funny. But eventually, it goes through most of her, a good majority of her married life, and when the Louis the 15th dies, his son Louis the 16th becomes King of France, and that's when Marie Antoinette becomes Queen of France. And so the movie is pretty much just her, it's about her lavish lifestyle, and that's what Marie Antoinette's very known for, this insane lavish lifestyle that she lived in France. They lived out in the Palace of Versailles, just this crazy palace, and spending, parties, gambling, and all this craziness, and that's what she's known for, and that's kind of what the movie shows. It shows her crazy lifestyle. I was actually kind of surprised that they focus a lot on kind of their relationship, because there's a big deal at the beginning of their marriage. For the first 6 or 7 years, they didn't have a kid, and it's just it's really, really important in those times to have an heir and have kids, especially like a son. And they weren't having sex, and so they didn't have any kids, and they focus on that quite a bit. Eventually they do get pregnant and they have a couple kids, but that was like a big deal. It was a big issue for her to not be able to give him a kid just because Louis the 16th just doesn't seem interested. So that's kind of an interesting part of the story that I didn't really expect. Just some of the other actors that appear here. Rose Byrne, this is one of her earlier appearances. She is the Duchess de Polignac. I don't know how to speak French, but she kind of comes into Marie's main inner circle. She becomes pretty important. And then another surprising cast was Molly Shannon from SNL fame, Saturday Night Live. She plays, I think she is Louis the 16th's aunt. She's in here a little bit. Let's see who else. Danny Houston. He has a recognizable face. He is Marie's brother, so quite a bit older brother, but he's the Emperor Joseph II. So he's the ruler of Austria, and he makes an appearance. He actually gives Louis XVI kind of a pep talk, and after he comes and visits, they do successfully get pregnant. So that's an interesting scene. And then one other kind of little storyline. So a big part of like Marie Antoinette's history, and along with the partying and the crazy spending, when maybe there's a bit of adultery and sleeping around and stuff like that, affairs, and they focus on one for part of the movie, and that's with Count Axel Fersen. He is a Swiss military man, and here he's played by Jamie Dornan. This has got to be an early appearance for him. Most people probably know Dornan now from the 50 Shades of Grey movies. He plays Dorian Gray, or Dorian? Whatever his name is, Mr. Gray. I haven't seen those movies. He's pretty good in this. First thing I've really seen him in, because I haven't seen the 50 Shades of Grey movies. But that's kind of an interesting little storyline, plot line. And then, Tom Hardy makes a very quick appearance. It's kind of funny. I guess it's not really funny. He just is in one scene. So, another early appearance for him. And, yeah, I mean, there's not much to it. It's, like I said, this is based on the real story of Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI. And it goes through from when they first day they get married, up into the French Revolution, when their palace Versailles is being stormed and they're being forced out of there. It ends there. I didn't know if they'd go all the way into the trials and executions. So this is not really a spoiler alert. This is historical facts from hundreds of years ago, late 1700s. So both Louis and Marie Antoinette were executed by the guillotine. They don't get to that part. It pretty much starts and ends when I guess it's good bookends. It starts when she gets to Versailles, pretty much, and then when they leave Versailles. And that part of it's actually kind of interesting. It's an interesting character because she grew up as royalty. She was a princess from Austria, and just kind of sheltered. That's all the life she knew. When she gets to France and just becomes insanely wealthy and just throwing parties and spending all this money on clothing and dresses and shoes, and it's just it's a pretty interesting look at her lifestyle. And actually, it's probably I was read it's pretty accurate. So even down to some of the dialogue that's spoken to other characters and other people, I guess it's pretty accurate. So that's cool that Sofia Coppola, paid that much attention to the actual historical facts. That being said, the costuming and the set decoration is amazing. So they actually got to shoot in Versailles. I guess they had special permission to do that. And it shows. It's just like extremely lavish palace and stuff. And then the costuming is amazing. It actually won an Oscar for best costume, which deservedly so. They look great. I'm obviously not a woman. I'm not a big fan of like dresses and whatnot, but you can tell that these were really, really nice period dresses, and the shoes and the hair and all that. They go all out for it. So definitely, I could see a well-deserved Oscar. And usually that's what the Oscars go to, period pieces for costuming a lot, which makes sense because they got to put a lot of effort into making these costumes and making them right. I think I read that the shoe designer, Manolo Blahnik, I think it was, actually worked on the film as well, doing like a bunch of really rare and unique shoes for the film, so that's cool. Other movies that I got kind of a feel for was, period-wise, Amadeus, about Mozart, and I believe that was that was the same time period, because they talk about Marriage of Figaro. It's actually the only opera I've seen, and they talk about that in the movie. And then I think Mozart actually wrote some music related to that opera. So that's the same time period. Actually got sort of a Wes Anderson-y feel to some of it, especially some of the montage parts, like with the parties and all the costumes. It looks very similar to what Wes Anderson does with his color palette and stuff. So that's kind of that was a one I didn't expect to pop out. And kind of similarly, Wes Anderson uses a lot of interesting music choices, and Sofia Coppola does a good job at integrating contemporary music into this movie. It's very like period and historically accurate, but then it uses contemporary music very well. So that's really cool, and it really works well for the kind of like the party and dance scenes, because it's interesting because it gives a different vibe to it, something that we can relate to as a contemporary audience, listening to like our own music versus at the time what would be, a lot slower string instruments and, kind of operatic music. So that's kind of cool. But that being said, it is pretty straightforward. It doesn't use the contemporary music and do something like A Knight's Tale with Heath Ledger or something, where that's more stylized and a pretty different take on history. Or I also kind of thought of Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet with Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes. That's very stylized. That's super stylized, but it's also kind of like historical, and they do something different with it. But here, it's pretty much a straightforward historical drama with just the touch of the contemporary music, which is really good. So that being said, it's an okay movie. It has great things to it. I really like Kirsten Dunst. She's a really, really good actress. Kind of on a kick of seeing her stuff. I just rewatched Interview with the Vampire, which I own. I just rewatched that, and I just rented the second season of Fargo. She's in that TV show. I've liked her a lot ever since I saw her in Jumanji when I was younger, and then Bring It On. I love that movie. So she's a really good actress. She does a great job in this. It's definitely her movie, but Jason Schwartzman also does a good job as Louis XVI. He grows kind of throughout the movie, and so they're both really, really good. But overall, the movie's just kind of boring. They kind of focus a little bit on the love affairs, but not a ton. And like they kind of focus on the partying, and then they kind of get into the revolution a little bit, but just very, very surface level. That kind of comes into play at the end. It's really about kind of Marie Antoinette's, how she kind of grows as she grows up in this palace in Versailles and has kids, and so it's well done, but it's just kind of slow. I don't think everybody's gonna love it, and not a lot happens. There's not like a ton of action or anything, so it's decent, but it's not an amazing film. I think it's good for people that like Sofia Coppola, if you want to see like all of her movies, or if you're a Kirsten Dunst fan, she's great in this, or if you're like really want to see period pieces about how the French lived and how the French royalty and aristocracy lived in this late 1700s period, would be a good one to watch. I think it's an interesting look at that, but I don't think it's one for everybody. I don't think everybody's gonna enjoy it. So all that being said, I'm gonna give it a 3 out of 5. So it's the things it does really well, but just overall the story and the plot are a little bit slow. So all right, 3 out of 5. Thumbs up.